Okay, so welcome to the March 27th session of Being a Woman online breast cancer support group. My name is Terry Wells, Marketing Director with the Beautiful Gate Cancer Support and Resource Center. And I would like to introduce you to Miss Lisa Brown. Lisa is, and Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, you have a very long, fabulous title. You are an MS LCGC genetic counselor, founder, and program manager of the University of Florida Health Hereditary Cancer Program. Is that correct?
You did great.
Okay, great. That's a mouthful. So here are the rules. So Lisa does have some valuable information to share. Um, Please feel free at any time during her presentation to unmute and ask a question. Because this session is being recorded, if it's something sensitive, kindly say, "Hey, Terry, can you stop recording for a moment?" That's all I need to hear, and I will pause the recording because I want to be respectful of everyone on our call this evening. All right, Lisa, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Where to go forward? So not everybody knows what genetic counselors do, so I just thought I would put this slide up. We basically, provide information and support for genetic experts, and this allows us to help patients and physicians better understand genetic test results. And for families, we translate this complex information into something that's understandable to them, as well as providing other information and support and advocating for their needs. So for physicians, we also help physicians. We keep them up to date on latest discoveries, as well as, how to help them order tests and interpret results and all that kind of stuff. So one of my most important roles is to disclose test results to patients, answer their questions, assess their needs, and help other family members get tested. And I'll talk to you about that in a little bit more. And so a lot of this is kind of redundant, but I want to make sure that I'm sending patients off to positive results on a good path where they know how to move forward. So assessing their anxiety, need for a referral to a psychologist is key, because sometimes this can increase cancer worry and anxiety. Give them a safe space to express themselves, their worries and concerns, so I can help them as best I can. So I'm not sure how many of you know about genes and genetics, so I like to start really basic, where we are born with 23 pairs of chromosomes in every cell in our body, and we get one copy from our each of our mother and our father, for a total of 46. And chromosomes contain genes that are made up of DNA, and they carry instructions to make proteins. Proteins have specific jobs that can help our bodies work normally. And so my role at UF is to identify peoples and families that have increased risk to develop cancers because of a genetic change that is inherited. And hereditary cancer predisposition genes, you all may have heard of BRCA1 or BRCA2, but they carry instructions to make proteins that suppress cancer growth. So when these genes or proteins are damaged, they increase the risk a person will develop certain cancers, but it doesn't mean they ever will develop cancers in their lifetime. Because of that risk, specific management should be followed. That's a little bit different from the general population. So, but the goal of genetic testing is to improve outcomes with proven medical interventions. And
public.
Was that a question? No.
Excuse me, what it's, I don't know, I'm having problems with the audio, you know?
Oh, you are.
Yeah, okay. It's like you're garbled.
Oh, okay.
I can hear you now.
Okay. Well, thank you for saying that. I can kind of go back if you want and just talk about, you know, genes are, we are all born with 23 pairs of chromosomes, right? In every cell in our body. And we get one copy of each from our mom and our dad. Chromosomes contain genes made up of DNA, and they carry the instructions to make proteins. And proteins have specific jobs that help our bodies work normal. Is that better? So hereditary cancer predisposition genes is what I specialize in. And these carry instructions to make proteins that suppress cancer growth. So when they're damaged, it increases the risk a person will develop certain cancers, tumors, or polyps in their lifetime. Management varies by gene that's detected, and the goal of testing is to improve outcomes with proven medical interventions and screening. So most of us are born with two working copies of our genes, one from each parent. And this means a person with a gene mutation is born with a working copy, which is the blue one here, and a non-working copy. Since each parent passes on half of their genes to their children, a mutation carrier has a 50-50 chance to pass the mutation on to their children. And I find people understand genetic conditions better if they understand what a mutation is. So genes have a 4-letter alphabet and can be thousands of letters long. So you see this is like letter number 120, this is letter number 130. This is illustrates what a mutation is. So the ATGC is the DNA alphabet. You know, our words have a ABC alphabet, right? So the correct spelling for a particular BRCA1 gene mutation would be at location 4787. There would be a letter C, right? And if that's spelled correctly, then we get a full-length protein, a working protein. To compare it to a word, it would be like the word color being written correctly, right? The whole word. Whereas a mutation is a spelling error in a gene. So instead of that letter C at location 4787, it's an A. That's all it is. It's just a spelling change. That causes a shortened or a damaged protein because it inserts a stop signal. So instead of seeing the word color, you see the word col or COL. That's not really a word, right? So that kind of, it's just a simple spelling error in your genes that can cause your proteins to be damaged.
Well, what causes that?
Good question. So the for hereditary, it's something that is inherited. So there's not really a cause for it. However, I'm going to talk a little bit later about how genetic mutations happen in our bodies on a day-to-day basis. I know that might be kind of scary, but we all have these genetic changes in our cells. The testing that I do is to look for those genetic changes that are in all the cells in our body because we inherited it from our mom or our dad. And so hold that thought because I'll I'll kind of explain what causes mutations in a little bit.
Oh, okay.
So in other words, basically the simple thing is that normal genes create healthy proteins, right? And mutated genes create damaged proteins. That's really all you need to know. And so many of you may have heard of the hereditary breast cancer genes, BRCA1 and BRCA2.
Yes, I was gonna add, that's what I was gonna get to, the BRCA. Oh.
Yeah, perfect. So they are, like I said in the other slide, they are tumor suppressor genes that normally tell a cell when it's time to die. So we don't want cells to grow out of control because that's what cancer is. Cells growing out of control. So the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene, they cause the cell when they're mutated to keep growing, increasing the risk of a cancer development. So when they're working, there's like a programmed time when cells die. When they're not working, cells can grow out of control. And I just put this little side note in. Angelina Jolie was kind of a foremother of genetic testing for this gene. She really brought it to the limelight and helped people in the general population understand this, what hereditary genetic testing can do for you. Because she was diagnosed to have a mutation in the BRCA1 gene. She had family members who had died of cancer or developed cancer, but through genetic testing, she learned she had this genetic change before she developed any cancer. So that we call that a pre-vivor, and she was able to make management and prevention and early detection decisions to prevent cancer or detect cancer early.
I remember that. I remember Angelina Jolie. I remember, and she made the decision to have them removed.
Yes.
Then she made the decision to have both her breasts removed
Yes.
prior, because of her family history.
Exactly.
Mm.
She also had her ovaries removed.
Oh, why is that so important, Dr. Lisa, to have the ovaries removed?
So you teed me up for my next slide.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Which is, so what do we want to do? I didn't actually put the risks on this slide, but there are increased cancer risks. So breast cancer risk in BRCA1 and 2 carriers, I'll show you another slide later that really illustrates this, but it's like 40 to 60% risk in your lifetime. Ovarian, I believe it's, like 20, 30% risk in your lifetime. So by removing your ovaries, so here's the oophorectomy under ovarian, that reduces your risk by 98% to develop ovarian cancer. Mm-hmm. And I have this slide here that kind of illustrates it. So you see, I can use the arrow here. So you see oophorectomy is removing the ovaries and mastectomy is removing the breasts. So, and then the blue color is breast cancer, what you're reducing for, what cancer risk you're reducing, and then the lighter purple color is ovarian. So by removing your ovaries, you actually reduce your risk to develop ovarian cancer by 96%. And interestingly, you can also reduce your breast cancer risk by cutting off the hormones, right, that lead to breast cancer development. Mastectomy reduces the risk of breast cancer by 90%. Now, if we go back, risk reduction is not the only way management tool for BRCA1 and BRCA2 carriers. There's a very smart oncologist who tells me that if you know you have a BRCA1 or 2 mutation and you get the screening that you need, and I'm going to go over it in a minute, you will not die of breast cancer. What will happen is the goal is to detect cancer early. The key to that is adding a breast MRI along with a mammogram and starting at a young age. Unfortunately, there isn't really good screening for ovarian cancer. So the treatment right now is removing your ovaries, but they're making a lot of advances in research where you can remove your fallopian tubes to preserve the ability to have children and to keep your hormones for a little bit longer, because they are important for other things like heart health and brain health. So
I want to ask you, when you said at an early age, how early?
So BRCA1 and BRCA2 carriers, screening with mammogram, or sorry, let me do backwards. Screening with breast MRI should start at age 25. And mammogram is added at age 30. The reason they start mammogram at 30 is because that is radiation, whereas breast MRI is not. And so they want to start the radiation exposure a little bit later.
And that's if you are BRCA1 or BRCA2, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. You know, Dr. Brian, I'm happy that you're on, and so I'm learning so much more, just a little bit of what I've heard. But
Yeah.
to reduce our risk of, if a genetic carriers of BRCA1 and 2, we're losing a lot of what makes us female. You understand what I'm saying? Then if we get rid of all of that, what you said, to reduce our risk, we can't have children. I'm just saying, suppose that they want children, and
Yeah. So
that's a lot. That's a lot to
is,
ask of a woman,
so that is why I emphasize that removing your breasts is not necessary. You can just do the screening and you don't have to, at least you don't lose that part, right?
Well, itself, but when you talk, okay, the breast, I can understand, but then when we're talking about the oophorectomy, that really caused, I wanted children.
Yeah.
But I wasn't able to have them, and I had to have a hysterectomy.
Yeah.
But I had a hysterectomy before I would, because of what's those things that were, oh God, it had nothing to do with breast cancer, but then I was diagnosed with breast cancer while they were treating me for the lesions that were on me vaginally.
Yeah.
What do they call those?
Fibroids, the fibroids.
Fibroids.
Yeah.
Yes. Fibroids. Thank you, Wanda. Yeah, so I was when I went in to have the doctor, he didn't want to do it. He didn't. He said you were young. But then when the excessive bleeding all the time, I couldn't take it. So he went ahead and did it, but we thought it would be a routine surgery, and that surgery lasted hours because the fibroids they were gel-like, and and he had to peel them off, except very carefully, and they would bleed, in my intestine, and it was, y'all don't know, God be the glory. I've been through some stuff, but then, and I couldn't. And then when I had that that operation. Then I was told when I had before I had the operation that I had breast cancer. You know,
Yeah.
so but when just to reduce our risk when we carry the BRCA 1 or 2, that's asking a lot from a woman, to give up
Yes.
if they wanted children. If they wanted children. So
And I have a question too
Sure.
on this slide. So I guess here's my question. When would someone consider genetic testing to see if they have BRCA1, BRCA2? Like my mother is not a breast cancer. She's never had breast cancer, but her older sister has.
Yeah. So there are certain criteria, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, of who should get tested and how. But in terms of the ovarian cancer risk, that's the worst part of BRCA1 or BRCA2. But I told you that one of the most important roles that I have is talking to these positive women about their options. And first of all, you don't have to remove your ovaries. It is your choice. But second of all, you don't have to do it at 25, right, or 30. So you have time to hopefully have children before you would consider removing your ovaries. 35 to 40 is the age that BRCA1 carriers are told to consider removing their ovaries. BRCA2 carriers, it's not till 40 to 45. That's because the risk for ovarian cancer pops up a little bit later age, so than breast cancer. So there's a lot of working and moving parts, and that is, I appreciate your comment about this being, big things that women have to do, but there's so many moving parts. It's individualized to that person. If they're 60, it's a different conversation from when you're 20, right, or 30 or 35. And the other thing is there's hope that we're going to develop a screening tool so that we can detect ovarian cancer, so we can put off the need for having that surgery. So there are a lot of moving parts, and you're kind of proving the necessity for genetic counseling, because I talk about all these, and I can tell you that once I finish a conversation one-on-one with a woman or a man who has a mutation, they really feel better, and they feel like they have choices and more control. But it is complicated, and it is a lot. So in terms of, so the testing that I do is on the right. It's germline, right? This person is all red because I told you those mutations are in all the cells in your body, right? And this kind of gets to your question, Pam, about causes of these mutations, right? Some mutations occur just in one cell here, one cell there in our body. And they actually can just occur in the cancer, but they're not in the rest of the body. And that's what the left side is, the somatic. But I do testing for the one on the right, the germline. So to get into that a little bit more, I can, I'll keep that a little bit. So what types of cancers can be detected with genetic testing? That was one of the questions that was raised. And basically, I usually order, so we've been focusing a lot on BRCA1 and BRCA2, but there are a lot of other genes, right, that increase the risk for cancers. Fortunately, these are rare and not everyone is at risk for them. But I can do testing for lots of different genes that can cause different cancer types. You can see on here, BRCA1 and 2 specifically increases the risk for breast, ovarian. Those are the primary ones, although there are some lower risks for others. And then these MLH1 genes are more predominantly colon, ovarian, and endometrial. So genetic testing can help tailor management depending on what gene somebody is mutated for. However, hopefully the slide is going to come soon. There. So this is a really busy slide, but it's super. So can genetic testing tell you if you have cancer? And the resounding answer is no. But this slide also explains how mutations happen. And that was one of your questions, right? I believe so. So I already went over that most of us are born with 2 working copies of our genes. So this is on the left. It says, how does most cancer develop? Well, most cancer develop is not hereditary. You're not born. Most people are not born to have breast cancer with a damaged gene in all the cells in their body. Most people develop breast cancer because these genetic changes happen after they're born. What needs to happen is multiple mutations need to occur in the same gene. That's why it's illustrating here in one cell. And then remember, these are tumor suppressor genes. So now the cell can grow out of control and can turn into cancer. But that's how it happens in the general population. Not all cancer is hereditary.
Well, is it environmental?
Yeah, so if you look down here, what is causing them? So aging, one of the biggest risk factors is aging. As we age, our bodies don't work as well, right? We have genes and things like that.
Tell me about it.
So the same thing is kind of happening. We kind of develop more mutations as we get older, and we've also had them for longer, right? Chemicals, diets, there's just a host of things. So there are things that we can do to reduce our cancer risk, and I'm going to talk about that at the end. But I hope this answers your question about, how these mutations happen. So,
but you said,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, but you said that our risk for being diagnosed with cancer is not hereditary. So, but then when you mention these things, that's environment. It's environmental. That when you said that something happens after we are born to our body. So, and you mentioned aging, chemicals, and diet, but then I think if you go back to the other slide where you had that chart, if that's so, if most cancers are that we were diagnosed with breast right there, if we're diagnosed with breast cancer or any cancer and it has to do with environmental, then why aren't these tests part of our yearly exam? Why aren't these? Why?
That's a really good question. And let me go back to this slide. It's impossible to detect them. If you think about it, these gene mutations occur in just one cell here, one cell there. The reason we can detect the germline mutations is because they are in all the cells in our body. So there's more cells that are, expressing damaged gene. And so that's why we can detect it in our blood. But somatic mutations, like mutations that are just occurring, kind of like here, right? How cancer develops. These are undetectable. You can't do a blood test for the most part.
Well, they're undetectable because until they grow.
Yeah. Now you are leading me to this next slide, which is other types of testing. So somatic testing. When can we detect those mutations that developed by chance or sporadically? Most cancer doctors look for mutations in the tumor that help them choose the best treatment for their patient's cancer. So they kind of call them somatic mutations, whereas what I do is I test for the germline mutations. So
okay, I gotta ask you. I'm sorry. I'm just full of questions. I really am.
Yeah.
So the somatic. You said most doctors actually, and that's how they know what treatment to give us, because they're testing the tumor, and that's when they do a biopsy.
Yep, that's where this slide shows the tumor.
Right. When they're doing a biopsy and they get a clip, a piece of that tumor, and they test it, and that tells them what the treatment options are.
Yeah.
But again, I wish you could make it all better for everybody, but I understand you can't, but I think those tests should be given on a yearly basis. I truly do. I think they ought to be, because especially, okay, let's just say the women that are on here, let's say we're all breast cancer survivors. We should be able to have this test as our, just like they want to do our yearly mammogram.
Right.
This should be a part of our women's wellness.
So you mentioned breast cancer survivors, and that maybe there's research to try to detect cancer in the blood before it gets too advanced. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Well, no, we already been diagnosed with breast cancer, but I think,
but you're worried about recurrence, right?
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah, so they're doing research on that very thing right now. And my advice to people who previously had cancer is to go to the NCI website. I think it's NCI, I can't remember, well, NCI.org perhaps, and look for research that's involving, detecting cancer in your blood cells after you've had a cancer diagnosis. And there are research studies that you can join for that. So we know a lot, but we don't know everything, and so that's why researchers are and participating in research is super important. We're touching on a lot of subjects that we can't really, delve into too deeply, but what I'm talking about, the tumor testing, is called precision medicine, and it allows doctors to select treatments, right, that are most likely to help patients. But this is the research based on this is where we're kind of moving towards, well, how do we treat patients who've had cancer, right? And how do we, the goal is, there usually is, depending on the stage of the cancer, a risk for it to recur. And so we want to detect that as early as possible so that it's not life-threatening. We're researching that right now. But yeah, I hope we do come up with a test soon that can be offered to you every year, as you said, but we're not there yet. So I was going to talk about other, types of genetic testing, but you have a lot of questions about, this. And I wanted to, so I skipped over some things. So when you do cancer panel testing, all genes are not created equal. So when we get back to the germline testing, there are genes that are high risk, right? They have, like BRCA1 and 2, they have 40% risk or higher. But there are also genes that increase the breast cancer risk that are moderate increased in risk. So they only increase your risk like 20% or higher. That's like double the general population risk. The general population risk for breast cancer is 12%. That's the sporadic most cancer. So treatment for somebody who has a gene that moderately increases your risk is very different, right? From a gene that increases your risk much higher. And this slide kind of illustrates that. So it's important to remember that not all, if you are diagnosed with a hereditary cancer syndrome, it doesn't mean you will develop cancer in your lifetime, and it really does depend on the gene. So these are the genes that we like to test people for who are eligible for hereditary cancer genetic testing. And just so you know, any woman who is diagnosed with breast cancer now by like age 60 or 65 or younger is eligible for hereditary cancer genetic testing. BRCA1 and BRCA2 are up here in that high risk range, as well as this other gene, PALB2. Compare that to the general population risk, which is this gray line right here. And then there's this group of moderate risk genes, which are the CHEK2, BARD1, ATM, RAD51C, RAD51D. So not all genes are created equal, and it is important to remember that it doesn't mean you will develop it.
Do you have
Go ahead.
Do you have stats on who race by race who's diagnosed more with BRCA1 and BRCA2? Do you have like statistics on that racially?
So I do not, except for one fact. It's kind of going into the weeds a little bit, but breast cancer, there's different types of breast cancer, right?
Right.
Many people who've had breast cancer, it can be estrogen positive, estrogen negative, progesterone positive, progesterone negative, HER2 positive, HER2 negative. Anybody who is negative for all those three things, estrogen, progesterone, and HER2, are called triple negative. I believe that African American women have a slightly higher risk of triple negative breast cancer, which unfortunately is not good because that is a more aggressive kind of cancer. It's not.
Absolutely. And a lot of the women who have come through the beautiful gate was diagnosed with triple negative.
Yes, yes. So it doesn't mean that, I don't know what the percentage is though of triple negative to not triple negative in African American women, but I do know that it is statistically significantly higher, but I don't know, and I don't even know what the risk is in the general population, but I do know there's a little bit of a difference there. I think what I did want to also talk about I thought I had put a slide in front of these, but maybe not. So I might have put it down the bottom. So cascade testing is really important. So somebody asked a question.
I know we had a young lady, this is why we reached out to you when she asked us when she was raised in the foster system. And she said, is there some type of testing that she could take or when you don't know your mother or your father? Is there some type, is she eligible for some type of testing, I guess, to understand her risk when
Right.
you don't?
That's kind of what this, so somebody asked, what are some of the biggest challenges, right, currently faced in early detection of breast cancer? And my answer is access to care. And that's what we need to do a better job of. For example, that woman you're describing, she doesn't know her family history. So in order to get a genetic test, you have to know your family history or have cancer. So that's a limitation to access to care. Unfortunately, and that's where we were having that conversation offline about, you know, so insurance coverage, what the cost of genetic testing is. If you meet criteria for genetic testing, I don't really want to go into what that is too much, but then insurance usually covers it, and as long as it's ordered correctly, it's like $0 to $100. But for a person who has problems with access to care, they would have to pay $250 if they wanted to pay for it out of pocket. So lack of insurance, not knowing family history, insurance coverage, and identifying and testing individuals at risk, that woman falls through the cracks, right? And she would have to pay for her own out-of-pocket test.
So
Well,
I have a
go
question.
ahead, Terry.
So for that individual who is not familiar with her family history, so is she still, like, if she doesn't know what type of cancers that may be in her family because she doesn't know her family, so would that make her not eligible for
Correct.
genetic testing? Or is there any other type of testing? So, and I guess I'm assuming now, since you say that, does that mean that part of the genetic testing intake is a family questionnaire? Like, is there a generic genetic test that can be done?
Yeah, so we talked about this offline, and that's why my next slide is family history.
Mhm.
And this is a problem with access to care because a lot of families, and my African American patients have told me, you know, a lot of, you don't talk about health problems, right? In the general population, people don't really talk to their family members about health problems. But yet the criteria for genetic testing is knowing your family history. So I do have a genetic intake that we use. Somebody gets referred to us and they fill out this quick assessment, but it's asking questions about their personal and family history of cancer. So that kind of, I use that tool to help me determine who meets criteria and who doesn't, but I always offer everyone, whether they meet criteria or not, the self-pay price of $249 is actually what it is. If, you know, we need to work towards better access to care, right? This is a problem right now. But that is, to me, one of the biggest challenges currently faced in early detection of breast cancer.
Well, with that said, again, I know we spoke about it off, and I'm going to ask Terry to send out like a little notice or newsletter, whatever. I'm gonna let her decide how she wants to put it out. Anyone that's a member of the our Being a Woman breast cancer support group who may find themselves uninsured, this and that, I'm going to pay for them to get tested. And but you do have other guidelines, right? That they must meet. So I'm going to do that for at least 4, and I'll take $1,000 and we will, so they can be tested if they don't have insurance or they uninsured, because I think this is very important. And it's also, to me, it's like a peace of mind. That would give them a peace of mind and for a better outcome,
Right.
mentally.
Yeah.
So
And
I'm willing to do that.
thank you, Ms. Pam. And we have a question from Dr. Bridget Boynton.
Sure.
Hello, good evening. On that last slide, you were just showing with the family history chart, and the one had prostate cancer. So my father had prostate cancer, and then I had breast cancer. Was that like my risk factor and my family history?
Yeah. So prostate cancer is increased risk in a few different hereditary cancer syndromes. And depending on the combination and ages of diagnosis, you may or may not meet genetic testing criteria. But especially if it was metastatic prostate cancer or, high risk prostate cancer, that a gentleman who has metastatic prostate cancer meets genetic testing criteria. That makes a woman who had breast cancer at, over age 50, who has a relative with metastatic prostate cancer, that makes them meet genetic testing criteria. So Pam and I and others, we talked about this tool that I have. We would have to figure out a way to, I'd have to talk to my office and figure out a way where we can, share it with this group. For HIPAA reasons, right? I'm collecting your data and you're not my patient, that kind of thing. So I have to figure those kind of things out. But I could potentially come up with a handout, right? I used to have one where we just, people would fill this handout out, and then you would know whether you met criteria or not. People can also reach out to our office for a self-referral, and we would send you this questionnaire, but we'd have to make you like a patient if you have help. We could do a quick risk assessment, and depending on what that risk assessment tells us, we'd either proceed with like a pre-test genetic counseling appointment or not. So that's an option as well.
So Lisa, I have one more question, because even though the Beautiful Gate, all of the 3D mobile mammograms are Florida-based, we have women that are part of the Beautiful Gate that are outside of the state of Georgia, outside of the state of Florida. I'm in Georgia. So whenever you follow up with us, can you share resources for women that may be in other states on how they can go about getting genetic counseling?
Yeah.
Perfect. And then I have one more question. With this chart, my question earlier, and it kind of ties into what Bridget asked, my father too is a prostate cancer survivor. And as I mentioned earlier, my mother's older sister had stage 2 breast cancer. And so where in the chart, and I guess I would have to do the assessment to see if I would be a candidate. Gotcha. I think I just answered my own question. Thank you.
Okay. But I did want to make this other point. well, two other points. What you can do, okay? Because most people are not gonna have hereditary cancer, which is a big part of my conversation. So what can you do about your cancer risk? What may influence cancer risk? So lifestyle habits, like tobacco and alcohol, radiation, viral exposure. There's some viruses that increase your risk. Hormones, diet, family history. One of the best things you can do for yourself is increase your exercise and reduce your weight, because being overweight increases your risk for cancer. But you can go to the American Cancer Society, and this is a slide that shows the recommended cancer screening for people in the general population. So people who don't meet criteria for having an increased risk. There's that. And there are also guidelines for getting cancer screening based on your family history. So even if you don't meet criteria for genetic testing, your family history may help you meet criteria for getting a mammogram starting at age 30 instead of age 40, like most women. So knowing your family history, but that's really hard because a lot of people don't have all of this information. I've talked to women whose, grandmother was a slave and doesn't know her ancestry, right? And so how can you possibly know your family history if it's not there? It was wiped out. And so that's a problem with access to care. And that kind of comes circling back that, some of us think that all women should have access to the hereditary cancer genetic test, right? Because sometimes it's hard to know your family history. It's just outside of your control. But if you can open a conversation with your family about cancer, the things you want to know is the type, the age of diagnosis is really important in genetic testing guidelines, and the type. When they were diagnosed is icing on the cake, versus when you pass, as well as what's the other thing? Knowing your, I can't remember yet, but the most important things are knowing the age of diagnosis and the type of cancer.
Great. Does anyone have any questions? I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. We have about 5 or 10 minutes left.
Actually, I had a question for Lisa. It's like, how does the risk of breast cancer differ in individuals with a maternal versus paternal inheritance of mutation?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah, how does the risk of breast cancer differ in individuals with maternal versus paternal inheritance of mutation?
Right, so maternal and paternal, it doesn't matter which side of the family you inherit these from, or which side of the family you have that family history.
Okay.
The problem is, it does kind of, if it's coming from your dad's side of the family, that means you couldn't possibly have a mom, right? Or your mom is kind of, it pushes your family history risk out a little bit. So
Okay.
it's harder to meet criteria, if that makes sense. If it's coming through your dad and they haven't had cancer. But it doesn't matter which side of the family it's coming from.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great question.
Yeah, there is
Thank you.
something that I did to mention, which is once people get genetic testing, it's really important to share that information with your family members. I call it cascade testing, and I think of this as one of the barriers, because not everybody is in contact with, let's say they have a family feud with someone and they don't want to share it. But the more people, it's less expensive if you're getting tested for a mutation that's already been identified in the family than if you're testing for the first time. And so this is like a whole nother, I could spend 15 minutes on this, but I feel strongly that, if a person who we didn't know was about to walk in front of a car, we don't know them, but I would still try to stop them from, being killed by the car. Whereas, same for family members. If you have information that could really help a family member, even if you're not in contact with them, if it would take a little bit of effort, like going on Facebook and finding them or something like that, and even if you're not talking to them, just sending them a letter, you could save a life, just like saving a stranger's life. So I know that's a weird way of explaining it, but people have a hard time with sharing information with their families sometimes. And I just encourage people to consider sharing the information despite any obstacles, because it could save a life.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because within certain communities, and I think Miss Pam knows this, but I've mentioned this in my family on my mother's side, we pretty much know everything under the sun and then some. On my father's side, I believe they don't talk about anything. And one of my uncles died years ago, and it wasn't until his funeral that we found out that he had prostate cancer or something like that. And my mom is on here, so she could verify. But so we have, and I know that my father's side of the family, they are more of the commonality, where they don't talk about who's sick, who has this, who has that. You find out after the fact. So thank you for sharing that. And I
Yeah.
think Ms. Pam and I talked about that earlier this
Yeah.
week, and we called it generational silence.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Yeah.
So this has been so helpful. Does anyone, Jasmina, you have a question? Anyone, if you have a question, just unmute and ask.
Yes, I have a quick question. Hi, Lisa. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Earlier, you had mentioned that age was important. And I remember when I was initially diagnosed, I was asked multiple different times at what age my grandmother was diagnosed. I didn't know because my grandmother didn't really speak about it much. So it was really difficult for me to identify at what age. But I wanted to know if you could please clarify, why is it important to know at what age is the person in your family diagnosed with it?
Yeah, I think let me go to the very last slide. Oh, I think I canceled it. That's okay. The criteria is any woman who's like diagnosed with breast cancer, age 50 or younger, used to be 50 or younger, meets genetic testing criteria. Now, another organization came out and said 65 or younger. But that's why age is important. If most hereditary cancer, or a lot of hereditary cancer, is diagnosed at younger ages. And so that's one of the main features of hereditary cancer. And it's a combination of, even if you weren't diagnosed with cancer at a young age, but a relative was, that could help. The way I help patients figure out ages is to kind of work backwards. How old were you, right, when you first heard that they were, and then how old were they approximately? If it was your mom's sister, well, how old, was your mom when she thinks her mother was diagnosed? You can kind of work out the ages that people were diagnosed by asking questions like that. It's like, oh, well, I was 5 when, grandma was diagnosed with breast cancer. My mom was this age. That means grandma would have been this age.
That totally makes sense. Now, let's say if she was diagnosed when she was like in her 60s, does that predict someone in the family getting the cancer, or the age just says that it's in the DNA, or what exactly is it telling us?
There's been studies that show if people have certain family histories, they have a higher risk to have hereditary cancer. It doesn't predict. There's 2 issues kind of here. Developing cancer and being at risk for hereditary cancer. So developing cancer, the more breast cancer you have in the family, the higher your overall risk is. And you may be eligible for screening. You may have a higher risk for breast cancer. Doctors can have screening tools that can calculate that. But my screening tool also does that. But then there's the hereditary cancer genetic testing. And that is, age, it also has to do with family history, but it doesn't mean that you have an increased risk just because you meet criteria for genetic testing. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I have a question for you as it relates to stress and the environmental risk factor. Would stress be related to the environmental risk factors, or is that more pollution related, chemicals? Could you speak more to that in a sense?
I think of it more as lifestyle, environmental lifestyle, right? Lifestyles can cause us anxiety, right? So I think of it more of as a lifestyle. It's kind of fits in with aging too, things that are your microenvironments in your body, as well as your macro environment, if that makes sense.
And those things can affect the body, the immune system, and the neuroendocrine systems.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, but we don't have. There's no tool that says how stress, how much stress increases your cancer risk. Unfortunately, if we
So
have
more,
yes,
so more research needs to be done in that area.
yeah, like right now, if you have a family history of, several a certain number of close relatives with breast cancer, you would meet criteria for increased screening starting at age 30 instead of age 40. But the same isn't true for anxiety. You know what I mean? It's like if your doctor's not going to say, oh, you've had a lot of high stress, you're eligible for more cancer screening. There's no guideline out there.
Yeah, which opens the question to, how many other factors could, be related to this that we're just not looking at, or it opens the door and there are other gaps in research that could be explored, such as Pamela was talking to earlier.
Right. Yeah. But there are things to that end. There are some common sense things that we can do to reduce. We all do know that stress is not good for us. And so we can work towards reducing it. We know that being morbidly obese, right, is not good for our bodies. And that, like I said, that can increase your risk for cancer. So there are things, exercise, lifestyle, things like that. There are things you can do proactively. The problem is it's easier to do something if you know for sure, how it's increasing your risk. And I can't give you the answer for that for a lot of those environmental risks.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah, a last question, please. So before you talked about non-BRCA genes that play a role in breast cancer, can you elaborate like how they play a role in breast cancer susceptibility?
Yeah, so it's kind of the same. It's just that they have a lower impact, and it's because the gene or mutation that it's in doesn't play as big of a role in preventing breast cancer. I don't know if that makes sense, but so CHEK2 or ATM are two genes that have a moderate increased risk for breast cancer. So those genes aren't as important in what's causing breast cancer. I'm not quite sure if I'm answering your question.
Yeah. I just wanted to know like BRCA2, BRCA1 genes are like said that they do increase risk of breast cancer, but like how much like other genes play a role in increasing breast cancer? Do you have a specific number for that?
So I don't know. The more I actually I have a slide that kind of shows that the lower the risk, the more common they are.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So more, whereas the higher the risk, the less common they are. So
Okay.
even though they have a moderate risk, they have a wider effect on the population because they're more frequent.
Okay. Thank you.
I definitely think some additional testing is needed. And if you ever want to do a research study, I guarantee you the beautiful gate can get you test subjects. As long as we can be spread out all over the country, not just in Florida.
Yeah,
because I want to participate.
Yeah, I'm not the best at coming up with research projects and carrying them out, but I might come up with the idea, but actually I would need a true researcher to actually kind of guide the process. But I'm sure there would be research studies that would be valuable on your group.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been truly eye-opening.
Yes.
And we had a lot of questions, and I'm sure we could do a whole nother session on different parts of this, because I could see how this could branch off into so many different lanes,
Right.
Yeah.
So
just to kind of recap, we will get the information on the qualification or the app that you have. We will come up with a way for us to bless 4 women with the testing. And Ms. Pam, does everyone have to be in Florida? I guess to go through UF Health, you have to be in Florida, so that excludes myself. Darn it. But for those of us that are outside of the state, if you can kind of share some guidelines, Lisa, on how someone could, if they're not in the state of Florida, also obtain genetic testing, and we'll make sure that we send that out tomorrow or as soon as we get all of that information from you, to all of our support group community. And so, Ms. Pam, do you have anything you'd like to say in closing? And I do thank everyone for joining us tonight and going over a little bit. And I hope that everything that Lisa shared was truly valuable.
Thank you all for allowing me to speak. You're a wonderful, wonderful audience.
Yeah, let's give her a hand, everybody. Come on. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Absolutely. All I can say is thank you all for joining us. I thank you. My newest volunteers, they are on. They will be covering the South area for me. I'm happy that they're here. That's Giote, right? Wanda.
Thank
Who
you.
else is on, Wanda? Who else is on?
Jane Chung. And
Jane,
yes,
absolute, from Florida State University. Is that
Florida
the one?
State University, and it's actually Dr. Jyoti, and
Yeah,
she is
okay.
here. And
And-
I forgot what school it was, but she's actually volunteering at Winna PBC. She's actually part of our research team and data analysis.
Wonderful.
Nice.
I am so glad to have them. They're energetic. They're ready. They're going to cover Miami-Dade, Broward, and Martin County for the MASS program. I am excited about that. And so we're gonna save women one woman at a time. That's it, however we can. But thank you all. Thank you everybody that's on. Dr. Bridget, Sonia, Jasmina. Thank you all. Jeanette, I ain't gonna forget about you. And I'm not sure who GDI phone is, but thank you. Is that Mom?
That's Mom.
Right, Mom. And thank you all. Just thank you. This was great. And thank you, Lisa. I'll probably have some more questions for you again, but I can always email you. But thank you all. It was great. It was wonderful. I hope you all enjoyed it. So we can close on out.
All right. Thank you and have a good night and see you all next month.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Have a good night.